When Mayor Bill de Blasio wins 4 more years next week, as he almost certainly will, he'll likely do so without the support of outer borough white voters. It's not entirely for lack of trying. Story continued below. There's no arguing that de Blasio has done some good here, wrote the Staten Island Advance in its Sunday endorsement of Republican candidate Nicole Malliotakis. But, the paper of record in the city's whitest borough noted, he has also been staggeringly tone-deaf. "I just can't get enthusiastic about de Blasio," said Kevin Boyle, publisher and editor of the Rockaway Times. "It doesn't seem like he likes the job, and it kind of bugs me." De Blasio brought back the Rockaway ferry, Boyle concedes. "Crime keeps falling and the economy keeps humming," he admits. "You've got to give the devil his due," Boyle said. "You just don't have to give him your vote." As of October, only 26% of likely white voters in Queens said they'd vote for de Blasio, according to Quinnipiac University, which crunched the numbers for POLITICO using data from its October 5 poll. Only 21% of white Staten Island voters supported him, and only 49% of white Brooklyn voters. The poll did not include enough white voters from the Bronx to be statistically significant. Citywide, only 44% of white New Yorkers said they'd vote for de Blasio, compared to 61% of all likely voters. It's an awkward racial gap that's persisted since de Blasio took office on the wings of his Tale of Two Cites platform, and it's a rift that observers suspect has a lot to do with the mayor's inability or unwillingness to effectively communicate with New Yorkers outside of his white, upper-middle-class liberal and African-American base. It's a problem that arises with remarkable frequency, in contexts that are often substantively shallow but symbolically profound: Columbus Day, the American League Championship Series, the Puerto Rican Day and the Rockaway St. Patrick's Day parades. "It's kind of meta," said Justin Brannan, a Bay Ridge Democrat running for city council and away from de Blasio. "These issues that don't really matter are the issues that some folks focus on and blame for the reason they don't like what's going on in the city. But they themselves are focusing on these issues that don't matter. It's a little weird. The first year he was in office, he skipped the Rockaway St. Patrick's Day parade because, he said, it was not inclusive to LGBT groups. It was. This year he insisted, for weeks, he would march in the Puerto Rican Day Parade, even though, to the consternation of his police chief, its organizers were planning to honor Oscar Lopez Rivera, who spent decades in prison for his role in a violent Puerto Rican separatist group. De Blasio, a homeowner of Italian and German descent from Brooklyn, is himself an outer borough white male, but only in the most technical, geographic sense. Culturally, the park slope he holds so dear bears a far greater resemblance to the Upper West Side than it does to Tottenville on Staten Island's South Shore. He is of them and not of them, Baruch College public affairs professor Doug Muzzio said. That was apparent from the start in his relationship with the NYPD. "One of the ways that mayors are judged by outer borough ethnics, as we used to call them, is, do you support the police, or don't you?" said Bill Cunningham, a Democratic political consultant and Bloomberg administration alum. De Blasio made it seem like he didn't, at first. He ran for office against the stop-and-frisk practices of a police department that would soon become his own. After a grand jury decided not to indict police officer Daniel Pantaleo in the chokehold death of Eric Garner early in his term, de Blasio told reporters that he had trained his son, Dante, who is biracial, to exercise care around cops. He gave Al Sharpton equal billing with his police commissioner on a panel about police-community relations. Days after touting his plan to eliminate traffic deaths, a news crew caught de Blasio's SUV running stop signs and speeding. De Blasio's spokesman blamed the police. The newspapers documented these events religiously. Then, in December 2014, Ismael Brinsley took a bus from Baltimore to New York City, and killed police officers Rafael Ramos and Wenji Liu while they were sitting in their patrol car in Bedford-Stuyvesant. The police said de Blasio had blood on his hands, and relations between the mayor and the police tumbled farther downhill. De Blasio has spent the rest of his term making up for the events of his first year in office, at the price of alienating the police reform movement that helped him become mayor, though to little apparent end. He made it harder for the public to access police disciplinary records. He's expanded the size of the police force, and settled a contract dispute with the police union. He's held steadfast to broken windows policing, even as critics have contended it disproportionately affects poor New Yorkers of color. More broadly, he has sought to appeal to white ethnic enclaves by resurrecting and heavily subsidizing the Rockaway ferry, and increasing overnight service on the Staten Island ferry while adding boats and lower deck boarding. He's vowed to replace Rikers jails with local jails in other boroughs, but not in Staten Island. He staunchly opposes any regressive congestion pricing proposal that threatens to toll the East River bridges connecting Brooklyn and Queens to Manhattan. He's investing $1.6 billion in road repaving, which is historic, his office says. And he went to war with the landlord lobby to secure a water rebate that stands to benefit outer borough homeowners. In a recent, somewhat plaintive interview with the Advance, de Blasio defended his record toward Staten Island, which likes to think of itself as the forgotten borough. As someone from the outer boroughs, too, de Blasio said, he's made sure that there have been major investments by the city of New York in this borough, in some cases disproportionately favorable to this borough. The Advance endorsed his opponent, anyway. The racial chasm persists. In November 2014, de Blasio had a job approval rating of 34% among white voters, compared to 71% of black voters and 56% of Hispanic voters. Last month, his job approval rating among whites was a still paltry 38%. This disapproval, it notably breaks along race, with whites being almost universally less supportive on a broad range of issues, Muzzio said. I don't know why. I could speculate and say that perhaps he identified too much with minority voters and the outer borough white ethnics don't like that. De Blasio campaign spokesman Dan Levitan didn't answer any specific questions about the racial divide, but he did suggest de Blasio wasn't entirely giving up on outer borough white votes. The achievements the mayor is running on, universal PREC, driving crime to record lows, building affordable housing at a record pace, affect communities across the city, Levitan said. As the mayor has said, we are competing in every neighborhood for every vote. Some suspect de Blasio's got a John Lindsay problem. Much as Lindsay was in the zeitgeist of the mid to late 60s, in terms of civil rights and the counterculture, de Blasio is part of the zeitgeist of Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, the social justice stuff that's swirling around campuses, said Vincent Conato, a history professor at University of Massachusetts Boston and author of The Ungovernable City, John Lindsay and His Struggle to Save New York. Lindsay, and perhaps de Blasio too, was seen as dismissive of the concerns of more traditional middle-class New Yorkers, Conato said. Amid the uproar surrounding the white supremacist march in Charlottesville, VA, several weeks ago and the push to take down statues commemorating Confederate generals, de Blasio suggested he would consider removing statues of Christopher Columbus. It was a move that may make sense to Park Slope types, since Columbus ushered in the enslavement and genocide of the Native Americans. But Italian Americans in places like Howard Beach, where Columbus is still a revered cultural icon, found the rhetoric insulting. Eric Ulrich, a Republican council member from South Queens, the last week said he would introduce a bill requiring a majority city council vote before the city can remove a statue. De Blasio's resistance to rooting for the Yankees, even if they made it to the World Series, also rankled. I am a crazed, rabid baseball fan and Red Sox fan, de Blasio explained. It is constitutionally impossible to, quote-unquote, root for the New York Yankees. Him resisting being a Yankee fan is emblematic of the way he resists New York on a personal level, said Boyle, himself a Yankees fan. Who can't even be a fan who can't embrace his hometown in the end. De Blasio's unwillingness or inability to communicate with white ethnics might merely be a function of cold, political calculus. Not only are they not his natural political constituency, but in a city that is now majority-minority, they are of ever-diminishing electoral value. There just aren't that many of them, Conato said. There are still a few neighborhoods in Queens. When you're talking outer borough New York, Brooklyn and Queens, you're talking about immigrant neighborhoods.